Great, thanks. Cool. Hey everyone. So Nathaniel here again. Thanks again for joining. We've got a bit of a crowd now, so we'll get it kicked off. So just introducing the people in the room. So myself, Nathaniel Galindo, I head up the engineering team here at Flow Power. Also with me is Alex Lehman. He's the demand response lead who oversees the program and the work there.
Hi.
Great. And Jacob Marnie. So Jacob oversees a lot of our major accounts and helps with facilitating some of these demand response activities across our major clients.
Hey everyone.
Cool. And we've also got Laura with us too on the marketing side. So thanks, Laura. She's kind of smirking at me at the moment because she doesn't have it. But all right, so just moving on. So a quick overview of the webinar today. So we're not entirely sure as to the level of understanding of demand response. So we're going to go pretty thin on the theory at the moment, but we'll touch lightly on the market overview. Straight after that, we'll get into the 6 steps of our demand response framework. So this is a framework that we've developed over the last probably 12 months as we start to refine this, and our clients are starting to be a lot more sophisticated in the way they implement these strategies. But number 3 there, we'll get into an actual case study into more detail around how a particular customer is implementing DR across their portfolio. And then any next steps in terms of questions and so forth. Okay, so before we get started, a quick introduction into Flow Power. So who are we? So we're a licensed electricity retailer. And to be honest, we're really pumped to be here. You know, the energy market is changing to a cleaner energy future. And so we're just excited to be part of it and really just help drive change through activities like this and facilitating these DR webinars. So, so there's a lot happening in the market at the moment. But yeah, we're just really excited to be part of it. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Alex. Actually, no, before we start that, we do have a quick poll that we want to just start with, just to get a view on the level of experience with demand response across the audience. And so it's a simple question. Do you do demand response? We'll give everyone maybe 10 or 15 seconds just to answer yes or no. And we'll come back to you with the results. All right. That's interesting. Okay, let's stop it there. Okay, great guys. Thanks for everyone that's responded. We've got roughly about a 20% portion there that say that they have done demand response before, and about 80% there that said no. So so we'll touch on the theory a little bit before we do a deep dive into the case study, just to show some of the background and some of the various ways demand response is being applied across the market. So so with that, I'll hand over to Alex to go through a market overview. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Nathaniel. So a very brief overview of the national electricity market, or the NEM, for those not familiar. This is the market that covers the eastern states of Australia. Everyone has to buy electricity from this market, whether you do so directly or, as most people do, via a retailer. It's a long and complex system. It's actually the longest interconnected electricity system in the world. One of the key factors is that the spot price, so what the people who are buying wholesale power are getting, is a dynamic pricing, which actually changes every 5 minutes, and people pay or receive the half-hour price, the average of 6 5-minute intervals. So because there's this dynamic pricing, it is an active market, and you get market type behaviors where, due to supply scarcity, the prices can go very high, or as we've been seeing recently, actually very low prices, particularly during the middle of the day. So one of the things that advantages is we're going to talk about demand response, because we can actually unlock some of this value by taking on demand response strategies with your business. So a definition, demand response involves electricity customers deliberately changing their demand in response to incentives. So really high level definition there, but that's what we mean by demand response. We're talking about actively changing how you use power and receiving some form of incentive, typically monetary, for that change in behavior. So now I'd just like to talk about the different types of demand response. So the primary type of demand response that we're going to be covering today is what we call natural demand response, which is a price responsive or wholesale demand response out there in the market. There's also emergency demand response, which we'll talk briefly a little bit about later, but for those who may have seen some discussion about the RERT program, this is emergency demand response. Frequency control is quite a specialized niche form of demand response that has been occurring in the Australian market for only a couple of years. And then there's network demand response, which encompasses a couple of different styles of demand response, but many customers out there have been doing this for quite a long time. So all of these demand response different types of demand response offer a number of benefits. So you can leverage those varying market costs. You can take advantage of that wholesale demand response, that wholesale price. You can reduce network demand charges, which often make up to 50% of an electricity bill. These services help manage grid reliability and security, which has become a major discussion point, especially in the last couple of years. And you can reduce overall energy costs, especially when you combine and do a few of these different types of demand response. So here, when we're talking about this natural demand response, this wholesale price, we look at what we talk about the price duration curve. And so these are actual numbers for Victoria for last year. And the circled section of the graph shows that we only need that peak electricity consumption for a very small fraction of the year, just a handful of hours, a couple of days, absolutely at most. And traditionally, in order to supply that electricity, we would build additional generation capacity, so a brand new power plant, and then we've got to build the poles and the wires to distribute that electricity. And that costs a lot of money to build. On a roughly, we're looking at $1 to $2 billion of capital expenditure cost per 1,000 megawatts. And then that money has to be made back somehow. And that's what drives the high prices, especially during supply scarcity. So demand response, if you can avoid using power during those very limited high price intervals, that represents a significant amount of value for quite a low effort cost. And that's what we're going to be focusing on talking about today. So now I'd like to introduce this demand response framework, which is something we've developed at FlowPower to help your business do demand response. So we have introduced 6 key elements that we think are important to develop this framework to help you implement demand response across your business. Because every business is different, the answers and the paths that each of these points will lead you down are different, but this framework will help you develop those. So the first point we want to talk about is the purpose. So why are you implementing demand response? Are you looking to save money to reduce cost, or are you looking to introduce a new revenue stream to your business? We then need to look at your operations and which pieces of plant are capable of switching load. So what can you reduce load to, or do you have storage capacity within your manufacturing portfolio, or say dam storage if you're an agricultural customer? Do you have an on-site diesel generator? When we talk about the price point, what generates value for the business? At what point is the cost to make any changes to the business to implement demand response offset by the benefits that can come through? People is very key. We need to talk about what stakeholders in your business are responsible for managing the different aspects of demand response, from the financial and operational decision makers to which staff should be receiving notifications about events, through to who actually will take action during the event. And we consider that all of these 3 factors, the plant, price, and the people, come together to form a plan, which is a document, a process that your business should follow when it actually comes to the event to perform demand response. And then critical, we think that a post-event review should be conducted afterwards to determine the performance and identify any potential improvements that could be made in the future. So that's the demand response framework that we've developed.
So before we move on, I guess, and Alex chime into this based on our previous experiences, but this took a little while to evolve to get to these 6 Ps, and really, as we started to implement these across a number of our client sites, we always found that there was that one component missing, and if that one component was missing, then that plan or that post-review process would always identify that there's a missed opportunity, or there was always be some value left on the table. So I guess over time we've kind of developed these 6 Ps and documented this into a form of plan, because as Alex said, every client is different, their operations are different, the value of their business and how they operate is different. So this isn't a hard and fast rule that we apply to all customers, because it does vary from a one-person operation through to a large organization. But if we can at least cover each of these 6 Ps and have this documented in a way where all the relevant stakeholders and processes are somewhat addressed, we find that when it comes to implementing demand response within, the 10 to 15 hours a year, the client's is in the best position to be able to respond in that time frame, as opposed to just leaving it to chance. Cool.
Yeah.
So we'll move on, Laura.
So something we're now going to open up the first and talk about the purpose. So when we talk about the purpose for doing demand response, I said that we're talking about unlocking revenue or creating saving opportunities or cost avoidance. So for those categories of demand response that we talked about before, the emergency alert program is a revenue source, and that is a demand response program that is run over summer in the national electricity market. And then there's also often network support agreements, which are specific to regions and the distribution networks in those areas, and businesses can receive payments for altering their usage in a certain way at a certain time, subject to those contracts. On the cost avoidance, energy savings, we have a number of one of our core business model is exposing those wholesale prices to customers and then managing those peaks higher up the curve to reduce the overall energy spend. So that's what we talk about by wholesale demand response or natural demand response. And then network tariff reductions are another way of what is often referred to as peak shaving, where the network demand charges can be reduced significantly for customers. So we'll jump to plant. One of the key things that we often, reactions we get from many businesses is that they feel that they have no way to be able to do demand response, that there's no ability to change the way they use their load or change their production. But we typically find that of the many customers we talk to, most actually have a significant amount more flexibility in their business than they realize. And often one of the first ways to realize that is when they find out that competitors in the same industry are already doing demand response. So competitors with the same processes and the same production methods. So the 4 primary forms that we contribute to plant are on-site generation. So that's either a battery or a diesel generator, whether that's an emergency backup generator or a diesel generator put in specifically for demand response. Some form of energy or process storage. So that might be a stockpile within a manufacturing production line, or a dam at an agricultural site, or thermal storage at cold stores. Shutting down non-essential plants, so being very careful or mindful about what pieces of equipment are using electricity or what times of the day, and specifically around these peak price events. And then flexible demand, so being able to shift production times outside of the high priced events and implement demand response by actually shutting down plant to meet that. When we talk about the price, we talked about there's a threshold that makes sense that is going to be different for every business as to what price makes sense to do demand response. So demand response, whether it's a savings made or a revenue opportunity, represents an opportunity value. And there will be some cost to the business, whether that's installing a generator or even running on diesel fuel, or delaying production for a couple of hours in the afternoon. All of that represents a cost. So when we talk about price, it's important that businesses consider what the opportunity value is on the other side as to that cost. And so this will impact, if we're talking about wholesale price, at what price threshold demand response will be employed, or what the value of a work contract would be to a customer in order to incentivize shutdown. So this is core when we talk about price, and it's important that every business takes the time to consider what that price means to their operations.
So Alex, what would be the spectrum of dollars per megawatt hour you could bid, or you could set a price at to do demand response?
Good question. We've seen a lot of customers who have very, very flexible operations can go as low as $200 to $300 a megawatt hour, which represents a lot of shutdowns in a year, but they have very, very flexible operations. Typically, a lot of our customers are looking more in the $500 to $1,000 per megawatt range and above. There are some customers who have critical operations, or operations that may be very difficult to shut down, that won't consider shutting down for anything more than $10,000 to $15,000 per megawatt hour, which is a very, very high dollar figure.
Yeah, so being able to understand how to realize that value and then compare that back to your business operations is really critical.
Yeah. So when we talk about people, this is probably one of the most critical elements in getting a demand response strategy accepted within your organization. We've seen that businesses that can align all of the key stakeholders, get their values aligned on demand response, are much, much more successful at actually implementing demand response. So getting the decision makers who might be in the financial or commercial teams to agree on implementing a demand response strategy, and perhaps even implementing KPIs across businesses, through to often we have sort of middle level management who might manage several sites or oversee teams of staff. They need to be across and managing those, how demand response will impact production or impact the site. And then critically, this is often where we see demand response fall over, is the primary and secondary responders. So the actual staff members who are going to receive text message and email communications that a demand response event is going to occur. We've seen that if these staff are not incentivized or have not been trained or informed about the strategy, then the whole demand response event can fall over there. So it's absolutely critical that a business aligns all of their stakeholders and all of their staff and understands the significance and how they're going to, how each person's role is going to play out in a demand response event. So all of this then, the price, the plant, and the people comes together in what we talk about the plan. So we talked about these wholesale demand response events only occurring a handful of times of the year. So on typically, say in this example, a hot summer afternoon, we see that there's going to be a forecast price spike. Now, we can often see this a day or two in advance. We know that there will be conditions on the grid, so a lack of supply, high demand, hot weather that will lead to this. And so we can forecast an event. And then as we get closer to that event, we understand that the event is going to go ahead with a high degree of certainty, and we'll confirm that event. And at that point, we'll send out notifications to the primary and secondary responders at our customer sites. And this is where the plan really becomes essential, that customers know what they need to do, know what the price they're ready to implement is, and that each of the staff members knows what role they'll play in the day. When the event actually starts, and this may be, the timing of these may be flexible, so it's not exactly determined, text messages, notifications will go out to those key staff, and they'll take action at their sites to shut down or switch over to backup generation or change to storage. And then further messages will go out at the end. These events typically only go for an hour or two, is the most common length. And and we'll send out notifications to indicate that the event has ended and staff can resume normal operations. And then afterwards, this post-review event, post-event review process is important. We'll take a brief look at that. Now, so one of the things that we've been developing is what we're talking about, these report scorecards to help customers make informed decisions about how they performed in an event. So to look at how much load was actually dropped, how much money was actually saved, or in the case of the work program, how much money was actually earned, identify where there may be improvements or further opportunities. And it gives particularly senior staff a chance to actually review how the strategy played out, because when they sign up to a demand response program, there's often an expectation of a certain amount of savings or a certain amount of revenue to come through. And so it's a good chance to actually review if those targets were met and how the demand response strategy is working. Typically, we find that through this review process, our experienced customers who've been doing demand response for many years often find that they get better and better each time, and they become very seasoned at implementing this and seeing where there's opportunities for improvement and running smoothly in future events.
Yeah, I dare say we've probably learned a lot from our customers as well in being able to understand how they practically and physically do perform demand response on their sites and how we can better provide more accurate notifications and implement those procedures a lot more efficiently.
Absolutely. So Jacob's now going to talk us through a case study for a specific customer.
Cool, thanks Alex. And this kind of echoes the point Nathaniel just made as well. So this is a very sophisticated customer that has worked with us on this framework, and we've slowly just implemented this with them and yeah, just worked through each of those steps that Alex has just taken us through. So I'll work through them one at a time quickly just to discuss what we did with those customers and how they've worked to improve their demand response. So firstly, purpose, and Alex did go through this point as to it's very important that everyone on site and everyone within the company does understand the reason they're doing their demand response. For this customer, the reason was purely financial, as it often is. And in this case, it was to reduce their wholesale price by doing demand response into high price events. This particular customer actually worked with all of their on-site guys and actually got us in for a session to explain the reason and explain the value as well in doing demand response and what they're actually benefiting from. And they also went as far to set staff KPIs based on how they performed from a demand response event, which has given this customer really good results, which we'll see in a moment. So the next part of the framework is the price. This particular customer actually has two separate price points. So Alex and Nathaniel spoke earlier about different customers having different price points. So from anywhere from $300 a megawatt hour up to say $10,000 a megawatt hour. This customer's got different loads. So their two large loads are their pumping load, which is bringing water from the river into their dam, and then their irrigation load, which is taking the water from the dam and onto the plants. Filling up the dam isn't too much of an issue for them. It's no skin off their nose to turn that off as long as the dam's 80% full, which it usually is, because the pumping is pretty much happening around the clock. So what they will do, they'll switch off their dam pumps anytime prices above $500 a megawatt hour. Watering the crop though is an essential load. The crops can't go more than a few hours without being watered. So they've actually set their price point for that one a bit higher at $1,000 a megawatt hour, and that'll be discretional as well. They may choose not to switch off for that if it's been particularly dry recently and they haven't had a chance to properly irrigate their crops.
So that's a good point, how this particular customer is now actually applying a load and a process and a price. They're having multiple tiers of that.
Yeah, that's right.
Based on what they can afford to potentially implement on site.
Yeah, and we find that with a number of our different customers. I actually spoke with a customer yesterday that had a price point as low as $100 a megawatt hour. So they're basically alerting their staff to those lower price points, making a call on yes or no based on what's going on the day, and then above $300, they've got like a firm no, we turn off kind of thing. So it'll vary company to company, and each company can have multiple price points as well.
So if we were to touch on that, Jacob, for a bit, that graph there shows the $0 to $100 mark occurring over 1,000, and if that logarithmic scale were to increase, probably over 10,000 times a year, right? 10,000 rounds a year. So that would be a very active customer.
Correct. Yeah. So you're talking. So yeah, this customer, basically they'll make a call on above 100, so they don't have to run all day. But yeah, you're right, very active. And then if you look far to the right of that, you know, you're $1,000 to $10,000. We're talking as low as 13 hours a year kind of thing.
Yeah. And so really getting that framework implemented and the staff trained on these processes, because there's only really 13 hours of the year where this DR is required, being able to undergo that training so that they can perform during those periods is really crucial.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And like you said, these events, especially for the $10,000 above, they happen typically over summer. So making sure this framework is revisited yearly at least, or maybe 6 monthly.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, staff change, people forget, and I'll actually touch on that a bit. So I'll jump to the next slide, roles and responsibilities, which feeds well into that. So this is actually a very important one, and it's something we try and stress to all of our customers, that there will be a decision maker at the company. This is the person that's signing the contracts, making the call, you know, implementing the procedures within the company, and they've got access to us, their account manager and the market monitoring team, and there'll be a facilitator. This person's usually responsible for running the events on site. They're responsible for providing us with the contact details of who to send notifications to. And what we're trying to show here is that the DR team on site, the actual operational people, should be contacting their facilitator, not necessarily us. The reason for that is we can inform you guys about the market. We can say, yep, this is expected to go on for X amount of hours, prices above $300, for example. We can't tell you how full your dam is. We can't tell you how wet your crops are, or what customer orders you have to fill. So it is very important. There's a shot caller essentially within the company who's got a direct line to us, and then a direct line to all the operational staff as well. So this next slide, thanks Laura. Next slide is our plan. So this is encompassing all of the stuff that we just spoke about: your purpose, your plant, your price, and your people. It is very important that this is documented somewhere in the business, and that's what we've just spoken about, because staff change, and like I said, I mean, New South Wales, for example, if you're only doing prices above $500, you might not have had to do this for 2 years. And if it's a policy of the company, if we're calling around saying you've got to do demand response and it's been 2 years, it's likely that we might be calling the wrong people. People have changed roles, and people would have left the company. So it's important that this is somewhere, and this is revisited as well.
And I dare say there's been a few instances where there's been a market event on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
And a few people were questioning why they had to leave the pub.
Yeah,
to go turn up a piece of equipment.
Or didn't leave the pub and then got in a lot of trouble on Monday morning when the decision maker walked into the room. So that is something like we often, Alex can attest to this as well, we will get calls from the guys on site saying, do I need to do this? Do I have to do this? That's not a decision we can make. And the other one is asking us to tell it to stop. We get that one a fair bit as well. So yeah, just make sure the people on site understand what's going on. It's the key to that one. So this is an actual customer and their results over 2 days in January 2018, that looks like. So this is a good example. Because this is dam load mostly, as we kind of spoke through, you can actually see their load start to increase before the event. So they're filling their dam up knowing that they can shut off, or they might be pre-wetting their crops, sorry. And you can see on day 2, they've actually increased their demand. That's them catching up, filling the dam up for what was missed on the day before, and making sure it's full, because they're conscious that another high price event is occurring the next day. So that's a really good result. These guys are, as I said at the start, it's a sophisticated customer that's quite good at demand response and yields really good results. And I think we've got kind of that on the next page. So total savings for this customer over 1 year, this was 2018, what we just looked at, 11%. And if you look at how much effort they're putting in, it's 13 hours over 4 days. So it's really not a lot of downtime for what is a pretty huge saving. And I didn't really indicate this at the start, but this customer is quite a large user and their annual spend is around $7.6 million. So we're talking a pretty huge difference and a huge dollar value for what is not a lot of changes to your yearly kind of procedures. And that's it from the case study.
Yeah.
No.
So I guess this slide is really the powerful one here, where we can look at a saving of 11%, over $800,000 for this particular year for 13 hours spent implementing demand response. So it can be quite lucrative in terms of being able to shut your plant down at the very right time of the market. We should also highlight that this particular customer is a wholesale customer, so they are on the wholesale market, so they are exposed to spot price events where it does peak. It does differ to customers that are on fixed peak off-peak rates, but it doesn't suggest that demand response is of any less value. Just like what Alex covered earlier, demand response covers a number of different benefits, whether it be through network, peak management, and other forms through road. So if you're curious about how that kind of plays out for your particular situation, by all means, would be interested to have a conversation there. Just moving on to the next slide. Okay, so that pretty much brings us to the end now. We'll open it up to questions. So if anyone has a particular question, they can write it in. I think it's in the top right box there on your screen, and we can address those over the next 10 to 15 minutes. So we'll just give it a second or so. I guess just before we address those, just a shout out to all Flow Power customers. This is a heads up that we are looking to facilitate a face-to-face demand response workshop later in October. And we'll send some more details out on this over the next week or so. But that will be a face-to-face workshop. It'll be designed to really go into your demand response capabilities and give you an opportunity to get prepared for the upcoming summer. So yeah, heads up on that and reach out to your account manager if you're interested in attending. Okay, so the questions are flowing through now. What was that? Can we go to the pub?
There was some of that more pub conversation, okay. So that must have cut through.
All right,
So we've got a question that's come through. What sort of equipment infrastructure did the agribusiness have to install in order to manage events? So this specific customer has been with Flow Power for quite some time. They manage the event in 2 different ways. So initially, they just send out staff manually to switch off the pumps. So it's as simple as the staff leave from the central hub, drive out to the farm where the pumps are located, and initiate a shutdown sequence, which is a controlled shutdown of the pumps, and then wait until the event has ended. That was how they managed the event for some time. We have a device called the K-Watch Intelligent Controller, which is a device that can actually control loads automatically. And after the customer could see the benefit of that, we have installed a number of those boxes at some of their river sites, especially, so the pumps that go from the river to the dam. And we can manually we can shut those pumps off from Flow Power, which means that no staff need to drive down to those pumps to shut them off. So they still do some of their sites, they shut down manually depending on what their operations are, and a large amount of their load they've switched over to this controlled load to remove the staff overhead there, or the requirement for staff to have to travel.
Yep. In terms of the infrastructure, a lot of it is pumping load.
So pretty much pumping water out of the dam and pumping water onto the crops. So despite it being a consistent piece of equipment, there is just lots of it, and so the control system surrounding all that can be complex as well. But okay, so moving on to another question: can the demand response threshold alerts be customized for each customer? Well, similar for the case study example, they set $300.
Yeah, 500 and 1,000. I think
500 and 1,000.
Yeah.
So yes, it can be set. I guess the important thing here is really aligning that framework to the price thresholds that you're looking at. And if you are looking at multiple triggers, aligning the plant and the people to that price trigger is the important part.
As a kind of standard notification system, we will do $500 a megawatt hour. That's when we typically notify customers and what we call running an event. The reason we choose $500 is there's often a knee jerk after that increases the price to roughly $10,000 and above. In saying that though, we can set up different price thresholds, and you just need to speak with our engineering team about getting that done.
Another question: so what type of customers are best suited for demand response? Well, I dare say almost all.
Everyone can do demand response.
So there are some manufacturing plants that do struggle with demand response because if they do shut down, there is a massive backlog of either product or cleaning procedures, or etc. that takes them out to 6 hours or so. But on the most part, whether it be data centers or chilled cool room facilities or commercial office, etc., there are loads amongst all of these industries that can somewhat be either shut down or tuned down, or if we can't affect the load, then there's always the option for going to generators. And the generator ultimately has the same impact, where it reduces the net usage on your bill. And so all these things just need to be kind of considered as part of that DR strategy.
It's all about that price point as well that we discussed. So demand response is definitely easier for some customers than others. Cool stores, pumping loads, things where you can store energy. As Nat said, the manufacturing one's one which typically hasn't as much in the past if there's a process running. But the market cap for wholesale is $14,700 a megawatt hour. At that point, if that's going to run for a couple of hours, almost every customer will save money at that point. So some of our customers will just set it at that, and they will only do demand response at that level. Whereas someone that can do it easily would do it at $300, $200.
Yep. Okay, do customers automate their demand response? Yes and no. So some customers prefer to do everything manual, and that's okay. It does go back to that strategy in being able to get notifications and prepare for the event well in advance to take advantage of the price spike. But more and more customers are starting to look for ways to automate that. And a lot of that typically requires some form of local control system integrated with some kind of market trigger. And so there are multiple examples of how we've been able to integrate Kwatch into a local control system, where Kwatch can simply provide the market trigger and the local control system can ultimately do the rest. But there are many different scenarios and applications around how this can all work. So again, we won't go into detail here, but if that's of interest, reach out to us.
There's a question come through: what telecommunications does the automated device shutdown utilize? So the device that we've got implemented uses 3G and 4GX, which is the improved standard for 4G communications in regional areas. That said, there are some areas, particularly a lot of agricultural customers who are on the fringes of cell tower communications. We have often found that we install additional booster antennas at those sites as well. So all of our communications for the automated devices is over 4G wireless for the related broadband communications.
That's a pretty good one. So the question here is, what happens to demand response when the 5-minute settlement comes in? So for those that may not be aware, pricing on the spot market is set on 5-minute intervals, but then is actually settled on 30-minute intervals. So it does mean that if we have one 5-minute spike, a customer can turn off then and there and catch 25 minutes of the high price event. 5-minute will, I guess, make it, you will need to react faster. So it will be handy to be able to automate things quickly and shut down quickly. But at the same time, when these events occur, they typically do occur for a few hours. So even though you're settling the price every 5 minutes, you're still going to see a couple of hours of savings if you're able to shut down for that period.
Just to add to that, there's obviously there's not known about what will actually happen, but introduction of the 5-minute settlement rule will remove what's known as 530 bidding, where generators can bid aggressively and then bid very low to achieve the 30-minute pricing. It's been a major discussion point at the AEMC. So one of the things that the 5-minute settlement will bring about is a change in aggressive bidding behavior, and generators will likely be forced to bid much closer to what they actually want to produce. It will force them to be more competitive. So that will likely result in better outcomes for customers.
I can imagine that being a very long, deep conversation.
Yes.
Okay, do you have to be on wholesale to do demand response? No. So DR can be used for peak management to reduce your peak load and that peak charge across the month. It can also be used for RERT, as what Alex covered earlier. So there are a number of different ways to implement demand response and different benefits to gain from that as well. Okay, we might just have one or two more questions. How commonly is storage used to achieve DR, and what are the common energy storage solutions for DR? Okay, so storage. Batteries are starting to be, well, I guess batteries are the trend at the moment. There's a lot of pilots in the space at the moment. Flow Power is involved in a number of battery pilots at this stage. I'm waiting for those to take off. And yes, we are using those for demand response applications as well. It does open up the level of sophistication in a DR strategy when we start to look at batteries, because it does open up opportunities in energy arbitrage, where it's almost demand response on a real-time basis, really, where energy arbitrage is charging when it's cheap and discharging when it's high. In terms of other common energy storage solutions, some of our customers are using thermal energy storage across their plant to implement DR, and particularly when it's a planned DR event or an anticipated DR event, similar to the dam application, they will pre-cool or pre-chill their plant to, by 1 or 2 degrees lower, with the aim of being able to ride out that DR event over the 1 to 2 hours. So thermal storage is obviously a key one there that can be used. But it's almost a new form of storage, like what Alex covered earlier. It doesn't have to just be energy, but it can also be product. It can also be water. It can also be a number of things where you've just got some capacity to just hold things off and not have to go full speed.
Yeah.
Okay, so we might need to wrap it up there. So we'll just go back to the phone number. If you are interested in having a quick conversation or want to know more about demand response, please feel free to call us if you have any other further questions that you want to discuss. And again, if you are a Flow Power customer, we are putting a lot of effort in putting forward more and more materials, a lot more documentation around the KWatch control systems, and a lot more information around our market monitoring services. And so if you are a Flow Power customer, please reach out to your account manager. And again, we'll be holding a workshop later in October to make sure that you are prepped up for this upcoming summer. So so we'll close it there. Thank you all for attending, and yeah.
We'll try and get back to all those questions that come through as well. We'll try and shoot some emails out to those if we've got that handy.
Great, good point. Thanks, Jacob. All right, thanks, guys. See you soon.